Welcome back. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, if you are just joining us, we are kickstarting our coverage of the very historic decision that Belizeans will be making next Wednesday. We're officially 6 days away. Yes or no, Belize decides. And we'll be sharing different perspectives as we lead up to this very important vote. And this morning, our first conversation is going to be with former Foreign Minister Assad Shoman, who is a representative of Citizens for the Defense of Sovereignty. Good morning and welcome back.
Good morning to you and to all your listeners and viewers.
All right. So I just want to start off by finding out how things have been going on the ground with the campaign. We know that after the injunction, there seems to have been a loss of momentum. Have you found the same in your campaign?
That is true, yeah. But you know, what we want to focus on, what I want to focus on is how important is that decision? What do you decide and on what basis? That's the most important thing I think people need to hear. On what basis should I decide whether to vote yes or no, and why? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to focus on that, if you don't mind, to help prepare.
Of course, you know, and that's a critical point.
It's a service I think we owe the people.
It's a critical point that has to be discussed, and I know that in the lead up to the original date of April 10th, there have been a number of concerns and issues that have been put forward, and in fact, you have been the subject of quite a bit of it in terms of your motives, in terms of your funding, the organization. Right. I want to give you the opportunity to respond here about how the typical phrase is you go after the messenger. How have you felt about the discourse when it comes to Citizens for the Defense of Sovereignty and your push for a yes campaign?
But it's not surprising because, you know, we live in a society and we have a particular culture, and the political culture of this country, as you know, is one that is motivated by suspicion, by fear, by a lack of appreciation for someone who might be doing something without, you know, monetary gain and so on. And that's normal. I mean, I expect that, and I'm not upset about that, really, because if think about it, that a lot of the time when people are approached by a politician and so on for the voting day, they say, well, how much are you going to pay me? So that's built into the culture, a culture of demanding something in return for doing something else. And it's hard to conceive of people not doing that. So it's not something that I'm surprised about, you know. But it is something that diverts us, and perhaps that is the whole objective of the thing. If we are diverted from the message and just keep attacking the messenger, then we lose track of what it's all about. As I like to say, we have to keep our eyes on the prize. And the prize is a Belize without Guatemala claim hanging over it. So, you know, to me, as I said, it's not surprising, but it's diverting. The purpose of it, and I don't think we should fall into that trap, is to divert us from the real issue. How should I vote and why?
The disservice to the Belizean people is, as you will agree, that the voice of the people is the voice of God. And the issue here is really an issue of trust. So, messenger, message, we can pick that apart and that can play that game. But the issue is Belizeans have been burnt by a lot of people. And so the issue of trust, not only from you in terms of the issues that they might have, in terms of being very cautious about trusting your position, but also in terms of the entire process. I don't know, you live in, you don't live in Belize permanently.
No.
Yes, you live in another country.
In Cuba.
In another country.
Lovely country.
But I don't know if you watched the news last night.
No, I did not.
It's a very difficult thing. But the first three stories were about cases that are in court.
Right.
And had some breakdown.
Okay.
So we're asking the Belizean people to go and vote to a court that their local experience of it is one that they don't necessarily have the utmost confidence in.
Sorry, those cases had anything to do with the...
Absolutely
no,
not.
Okay, just...
absolutely not. But when you speak about
people's
court,
perceptions of courts.
when you... Belizeans' experience with the court
Yeah.
every evening on the 6:30 news
Yeah, right.
is one that they don't necessarily find it to be the most trustworthy. Have the leaders done enough, including yourself, done enough to deal with that issue before you sit down and you talk to me? That's why when people speak, they go, you know, whoever is coming is doctor, something they have so many years experience, all the credentials are put there. Have we done enough? And are we just simply rushing through to try to sing the praises or to answer the call and the drumming of the Americans, of the EU, of the British, who are somehow and surely have a say or an influence in the pace at which we move?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that it was Belize that began the push to go to the ICJ. And this began many years ago. I would say at least 15 years ago. You recall that we had a facilitation process, which was almost, I mean, at one point it played out almost like we were a court. Both sides presented all their documents, both sides had oral hearings, and as a result of that, there was a decision or a proposal made by this panel of facilitators, which were to take to a referendum. Guatemala refused to do that because it felt it wasn't favorable. The proposals were not favorable to it. As a result of which, it just kept saying, let's keep on negotiating. Although we had both signed a letter, a side letter, saying that if the proposals are not approved by either country, then we agree to take the judicial route. And they refused to do that. So by 2004, 2005, we had to start a campaign to pressure Guatemala into finally agreeing to go to the ICJ. And the only thing we could have done, we couldn't actually get them to agree to do that. The best we could have done in 2005 was to get them to sign the framework agreement, which you're familiar with, and confidence building measures, which said that the Secretary General of the OAS, if he determined that the negotiations were getting nowhere, then he would recommend that we do that. We tried right away to get him to make that recommendation. And he hesitated. He said, I'd like both countries to agree, and that didn't happen until the end of 2007 throughout this whole process. As you know, the PUP was in government, and it was my task to convince the leader of the UDP to come on board with that. It wasn't easy, but he finally agreed, and then all of us went together. So we negotiated a special agreement, and that special agreement is a treaty. It is a legal obligation adopted by the state of Belize, not by a government or a party, by the state.
If I could just extract a bit of what Kevin was asking in that particular question. In a decision-making process, you are right. Ideally, we want to look at the facts of either side, but we cannot move away from the emotions of it as well. And we can also look at the perceptions that may come as well. One of the perceptions that's been built is a mistrust of legal systems. And one of the clear examples of that is the recent court cases that have had to do and led to the injunction that we did not have a referendum on April 10th.
All right.
Now, speaking as a promoter of a yes vote to go to the ICJ, where your messages have clearly been, we have a solid case moving forward in this process. It was the very same perception, or it was the very same message that Belizeans heard about going into the case, challenging the constitutionality of the special agreement and on whether or not we should have the referendum on April 10th. So I want to ask you, what are the implications of Belizeans seeing a failed court case, and that's what, I mean, that failed court case in the local courts on your message in going to the ICJ?
The implication of one and the other.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if there is a direct implication. I think there's a general, as you both have said, a general distrust on the legal systems generally, and courts in particular, right? And that is based on people's personal experience, which is how normally we form our opinions, right? So it's something that people just have to divorce one thing from the other, that the International Court of Justice is unique, really. It is a world court made up of judges that all of us who are members of the United Nations have a role in electing these judges, and all the qualifications, you know all about this. And it's very different from any local court that we may know. And what is more, I don't ask people to believe what I say, what anybody says, but really to think for themselves and to look up these things, to learn about it as much as possible. And I, for one, for example, if I am faced with one or two people who are holding up an opinion, say about the court and what it does and how it works, and what its decisions are they biased or not? And if I look at the facts and I listen to, for example, lawyers or judges who have been presenting to that court or deciding in that court, then I have to make up my own decision, but I will give more weight, I think, to the people who have been involved and who are part of the system and who can show what the actual decisions are. I mean, if you look at the decisions of the World Court in cases, right, you will find that there are certain principles that are always upheld. And those are the precise principles that favor our cause.
But what I'm not hearing from you is how you differentiate, how the ICJ would be significantly different from what we saw take place in our local courts. And I'll give you a very clear example. When you talk about going to the ICJ, we use very clearly what is outlined in Section 38.1, which are the three mechanisms that will be looked at by the judges. If we look at what took place in the local courts, the injunction was filed based on the writ of referendum, which had never been a part of the conversation until the Chief Justice recognized the discrepancies there. So for a layperson who is watching this process, and we talk about all the solid points that have been presented,
right,
the main question that would come to any person's mind is, what is the loophole? What is the one area? What is the writ of referendum in our ICJ case that may cause us to not have the results that we are being told we'll have?
Well, let me start by saying that I am not qualified to discuss these legal issues, right, or this judicial process locally. I think, there are people who are qualified to do that, and I confess I am not. But the writ of referendum, if you like, for the ICJ is a special agreement. So it's there for all to see. And Article 38.1 is something that has been used and worked in dozens of cases before the ICJ. So we can go to those cases, we can look at those cases. Look at cases, for example, like the Nigeria case that was so popular a few months ago or so, with a totally distorted, and I think purposely distorted, description and explanation of that case. Look at all these things and certain principles, such as that once a treaty establishes a border, that border has a life of its own, a legal life of its own, cannot be changed, and so on. The principle of self-determination and what that means for territorial integrity, which was recently confirmed by the case advisory opinion of the ICJ earlier this year. All these things are there for all to see. And when we get an opinion, for example, from a judge who was the president of the ICJ until recently, until 2000, I think it's something we should look at. I mean, we can't blindly follow anything that anybody says. But when you have a string of lawyers, those who have advised Guatemala as well as those who have advised Belize, tell us what the facts are, how the court is likely to interpret those facts, what law is to be applied to that court, I think we should take that into consideration.
Carolyn Trent Sandiford says that she's...
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Carolyn Trent Sandiford is repeatedly says, you're an attorney by...
I was many years ago in a different life.
But
yes.
Carolyn Trent Sandiford says, and so you understand attorneys. Sometimes. You don't? But Carolyn Trent Sandiford is repeatedly saying that the law is she doesn't practice it because the law is an inherently deceitful profession. It just tends to be that way. We have these opinions from these different lawyers. You also have that training in law. And all of them are saying, listen, this thing I saw is a strong chance that there's a win for Belize, correct?
Yes.
Yours. But one of the things that changed from the last time you were here was that we got a legal opinion from a very well-respected legal person in Belize. Two, actually. We had Mr. Gian Gandhi, and we had Mr. Dennis Barrow, who has served as judge, and I think he's currently serving as a judge now in Eastern Caribbean, who have said pretty much, significantly different from the. I remember we had posed a question to you last time you were here, and you said, in terms of what the risks are and the likelihood of us losing, and you said, you want me to sit here and come up with a phantom thing people like to hear that they lose. But then we have two very well-respected Belizeans that says, listen, there is a risk. There is a litigation risk. The possibility of us losing is there. In fact, the updated opinion that came back says, listen, I can't tell you that you have an ironclad case. What I can tell you is that where your vulnerability is in these hundreds of years of history. I don't know what's going to come from that.
Right.
Right? I want to go back to Gian Gandhi's thing, that the Belizean people want to know that there is no risk of losing anything. And surely your confirmation that you cannot guarantee that.
Well,
is that right? You cannot guarantee that we will not lose anything.
wow.
Very simple question.
But
It's a very simple
there's
question.
not a simple answer. I can't say yes or
Man,
no.
that's a simple question. If I ask a taxi man that if you're carrying me on my spot or you're not carrying me on my spot, then tell me yes or no.
Okay, well then yes, the answer is yes. I mean, if anybody can show me what evidence Guatemala can present to take away the legitimacy of the 1859 borders, right, that were established by the 1859 treaty, I will gladly listen to and want to know about it. I know that the Guatemalan case, we all know, is not that the 1859 treaty does not exist. They accept that it exists. They accept the precise wording of that treaty, including where the markers are and so on, right? Their contention is twofold. One, that it was a treaty of cession, and as a result of which the compensation for it has to be paid or else the treaty is invalid. That is their position. And they're saying the compensation was Article 7, the means of communication. That was never done. It was Britain's fault, therefore the treaty falls. That is an argument that was studied by Manley Hudson, which was their lawyer back in 1950. And he said, number one, it's very difficult that the court will decide that it is a treaty of cession. And he told them why. The wording, etc., the background, what the signer, Aisinena, the foreign minister of the treaty, said, etc. And two, he said, even if it was a treaty of cession, which is doubtful, but if it was, the cession is consummated, it is completed. You can't change that now, especially when you didn't try to say it is void until 80, 90 years later. So, you know, something that Schwebel said in an interview that was made of him recently, he said, after I read the judgment, the opinion by Manley Hudson, I'm surprised that Guatemala didn't just give up from then, because the truth is nothing has changed since then. The law is the same about the sanctity of borders and about also, I think, something that we need to clear up. Did we inherit the obligations of the 1859 treaty? Because most lawyers will tell you if you inherit the benefits, you inherit the obligations as well. The law in international law is not that. It may be unfair. Guatemala certainly thinks it's unfair. But that is the law.
So if
we did not inherit the 1859 treaty in 1981.
So
we inherited the borders.
So if we did not, it makes no sense to go to court then.
Why not?
If you're saying the purpose of the court, from what you're saying, and I could, as somebody who understands the profession, and as an attorney myself, you sit and you look at the case. Sometimes you get new angles. Repeating what an opinion is of an opinion and going on that opinion simply puts you back in the position of assessing that opinion.
Yes, sir.
Doesn't broaden whatever possibilities they are. Sometimes you need to wash your head, come back again and look at it afresh, and you find a completely different angle that nobody looked at.
Okay.
But when you look at the case, you are saying that the reason why we're going to court is because of whether or not we interpret, they're saying that their case is built on or non-compliance with a provision in there.
Right.
And you're saying that, man, then argue something when it make no sense, because we never not inherit the treaty. We inherited
the border.
The borders. So their dispute must be with somebody who or something that breached something in relation to their agreement, which is not us.
Their beef is with the UK.
Yes, so why are we going to court with them?
Because
if they're for them beef that with a third party, why didn't they go to court with me?
You know why? Because they're not claiming a piece of England, they're claiming Belize, territory of Belize. They are a bully neighbor that, as you know, the actions in the South Sudan recently and all their actions along the border for many years shows that, they do not respect our borders. And we need them to respect our borders because they are a powerful country compared to us.
We don't need them to respect our borders.
We surely do.
We don't need them to respect our borders. Who we need to be able to observe our borders is the international community.
Really?
Because
is it the international community bullying us at the SARS too?
Even if we were to win this case,
yeah,
we still will depend on the international community for some assistance, right? And even if
will depend on the international system.
And even if we win this case, the Guatemalans, very likely, even the lay Guatemalan who are poaching and coming across, would respect a paper decision. You agree with that?
No, I don't. The government has to respect it. The government. I mean, people will always cross borders. It's happening everywhere. You see that. That's one of the major issues of modern day life. But the government of Guatemala will have to respect the decision of the court.
In what way? What will change?
It will have to recognize that there is a border, right? And will not be able to continue behaving as it is behaving now in the Sarstoon, and it could do that anywhere else, because it's not just at the Sarstoon that they say there's no border, it's everywhere. So it is important. I mean, the international community, fine. They will recognize whatever judgment the ICJ puts down. And
I still don't understand how there's a principle in law called privity of contract, which is if I buy something from you, right, and I give it to Marlene as a gift, and it is faulty, Marlene can't sue you for that.
Right.
I have to be the one to sue you because I don't want to buy it from you. I still can't understand how, if there's a problem, as you are saying, between the British and the Guatemalans,
right,
why we are going to court. It just does not make any sense, except for the fact that we are standing in as a sitting duck in a place that we ought not to be.
And we're suffering as a result of it. I mean, if it didn't matter, if we weren't losing resources.
You're saying to the international community, it's very clear. Any smart person in the international community will know that we have borders.
Of course.
Yes. So Guatemala knows we have borders.
But they are not in a position to say, those are the borders of Belize with any authority. For example, we cannot get a resolution.
That's a misspeak, though.
We cannot get a resolution, believe me.
There has to be a misspeak, Mr. Shoman.
Can I finish? You can't expect to get a resolution at the UN saying, we, the world, international community, recognize the borders of Belize with Guatemala as being the mid-channel of the Sarstoon, etc., etc. And the border with Mexico, they will not do that. They are not qualified to do that.
Didn't we already have that? In fact, when we became independent, I made to understand that of the United Nations, didn't get like only two never vote, and America.
Let's forget about who. Let's say everybody voted. Let's say everybody voted.
Yes.
They did not define the borders, man. They think about it. I mean, you're a lawyer, right? You know that there are territorial disputes all the time between independent states. Each of those states was admitted to the United Nations just like Belize, my brother. But they have a dispute. So no, that being admitted to the United Nations does not define your borders. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any disputes going to the ICJ because they're all admitted.
Help me.
Please.
Help me. So, and please help me.
I will. Well, you can help me more, I think. You're the lawyer.
No, I'm on this side. I'm not being paid on that side. Don't do that at all. So, the process of becoming an independent nation isn't the process where you take your constitution, which includes provision 1, which says what the boundaries are.
Yeah.
And then you submit that. So when they're saying, yes, we agree to Belize or agree to America, it is what is defined in that paper that you give them? No,
it's not so.
It's not so? No. What is it?
Look, man, what you put in your constitution, and thank goodness it is true, has no force in international law. Why I said thank goodness? Because remember in the Guatemala constitution, what did it say? That Belize is a part of Guatemala. They were a member of the United Nations. Does that mean the United Nations agreed with them that Belize is part of Guatemala? Come on. So what you put in your internal laws and things has no bearing. What has bearing in the international system for definition of borders is a treaty, which is why the most essential point in Article 38.1 that Marlene mentioned is number one, we don't have to go beyond that almost. Treaty. What are the treaties that have to deal with the borders between Guatemala and Belize? Not with Mexico, because I know there have been people that saying, oh no, the whole of Belize is not included in the 1859 treaty. Of course it's not. We all know that. But that is the only thing that they can look at first, the first thing that we look at. And if they decide that that treaty is valid, which all the law that they have been practicing for all these years would lead to that decision, that is an end of the matter, man. And it is their decision, which is why it is necessary. Some people ask why the court have to decide that if we don't know what it is. Because we need the court to make that determination, because once the court makes that determination, then it becomes binding on Guatemala, not the UN resolution. And they forward that decision, that opinion, to the Security Council through the Secretary General, and then it becomes something that the Security Council is concerned on the Charter, Article 94, I believe it is, to see that it is put into effect. That is why we need to go to the ICJ.
You brought up a point before, and I want to go back to it, because before we even talk about what may potentially play out in the ICJ, Belizeans need to decide first. And one of the critical areas that has really become, I think, one of the forefront issues is that voters feel that deciding on going to the court on a claim that they do not know and do not understand puts them in a position where it's safer to simply say no. And I want to get you to share some insight on this as to what the potential claims can be. We may not know definitively, but we surely, with the years of experience, can hazard a probable guess.
Well, I can do some guessing, but it has no authority whatsoever. Anybody can guess anything, right? Guatemala originally claimed the entire territory, as you know, right? Then, after it had recognized Belize as a state, it looks ridiculous claiming every state has to have territory. So then it suggested that, you know, the claim could be from the Sibun down and so on. But it didn't say that it gave up the claim to the rest, which is why when it came to negotiating the special agreement, Guatemalan negotiators could not say the claim is only from the Sibun, because they could be violating their constitution or their laws or whatever they said, right? Which still claim the whole. So they didn't state what their claim is. So let us assume that the claim is for the entire country, man. Let us assume that. No matter what the claim is, the law is the same. But what I want to emphasize here, Marlene, I think this is the most important thing, that the treaty and the borders established by that treaty are very clear and very definite. You know, there's no question as to where Garbats Falls or where Gracias a Dios should be. The Guatemalans sometimes try to question that, you know. And I remember even during the facilitation process, they tried to get Mr. Pila, who came as part of the international group, to draw the lines for the confidence building measures. They tried to tell him it's in a different place, but there's no question about that, because there is no location that everybody would say that is Garbats Falls. So the treaty said clearly the two commissioners from Guatemala and from Britain will go and they will decide where it is. And wherever they decide, that is it. In the most ridiculous place you could imagine. If they decide that, that's it. It was decided by them. Many years later, in 1931, it was confirmed by them. So what I want to say, the borders are not in question. The markers are not in question. The territory is not in question. This is the question I think people want to know. Can the ICJ, having seen that treaty and recognized its validity, decide that a little piece, whatever small, or some part of Belize,
a southern island,
whatever,
access it to maritime areas
exactly.
in the south.
If any part of that is included can be by them removed from the treaty, cut off from the treaty, excised from the treaty, cut away, they can't. It is impossible in law for them to do that. So that, you know, this is a indivisible territory. We're not afraid that one piece or another, as I think in that famous interview, the foreign minister of Guatemala, when he said, we're probably going to lose, and he said it's all or nothing. It's not as if you could cut off pieces here and there because,
But
that's
one of the areas where there is a discrepancy is looking at the maritime areas in the south.
Okay, yeah,
And I want to talk about what or risks are there.
right.
Coupled with the fact, in fact, go ahead and respond to that first question. What are the risks associated with going to the court and Guatemala, or the ICJ ruling that Guatemala can get maritime access, that we lose some of our international waters? What are the risks there?
Right. I don't like to use the word risk in that situation. You know why? Because
We can lose something.
no,
We're likely to lose
no
something.
risk talks about the possibility of losing, and I'm saying that is not really the issue. Because forget about the claim. Let's say the claim never existed, which is what will be the situation when the court looks at the maritime area. First, it has to decide on what is the continental land and so on before it can look at the maritime. So when it looks at the maritime, it has already decided, right? There's no claim. The claim is finished. However it's finished, right? How, therefore, on the basis of that territory, do we demarcate the seas in accordance with the International Convention on the Laws of the Sea, which requires, in certain situations, for equity to be performed?
But you said the continental
And I want to-
territory won't change, so the maritime area shouldn't change either.
Well, but what are the maritime areas? Do we know?
Well, we have the Maritime Areas Act,
You have the Maritime
which
Areas.
doesn't necessarily conform to what is our continent, what is our current terrestrial
And
area.
what is our right? What is our right?
And if we could get up a map of Belize, this would be helpful, because I think we'll be able to discuss
Okay,
it
let's do
further.
it, let's do it.
One of the things, though, that we heard from a former foreign minister himself is that the campaign and the education on going to the ICJ has not been clear on one area, that Honduras has an interest in what takes place in our maritime areas. Here we go. This is the map.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about the boundaries as they would be defined, we see how Guatemala in this small area would be completely X'd out if we maintain the boundaries that exist now. But going back to my question, former Foreign Minister Eamon Courtney has spoken of the fact that we have been, that a part of the campaign has not addressed the fact that Guatemala does have an interest in this case and may potentially join in as an interested party.
Honduras, you mean.
Honduras, sorry. Thank you, Honduras.
Yeah.
Because of our southern territorial seas.
Right. Yes.
We've never heard this point. No one has spoken of this before.
Right. I think we are conscious of this from the fact that, you recall, in the facilitation process, Belize invited and Guatemala agreed and the OAS agreed to have Honduras as part of that situation, as part of that negotiation. And Honduras became the key, actually, to the proposals and the solution that the facilitators proposed. Their proposals were based more than anything else on the fact that Honduras was willing to share with Belize the area that would be granted to or allowed to Guatemala to exit to the high seas, and the granting of an area, a maritime area, to Guatemala as an exclusive economic zone. To the degree that at first when we started talking with Honduras, they were saying, well, it's Belize's claim, or we just want to help, so Belize should give a bigger share, and so on. We negotiated with them, and it wasn't too difficult, quite honestly. And they finally agreed that it would be half and half. They would give as much as we would give, although they weren't being claimed by Guatemala, you know what I'm saying? So that we know that Honduras has a stake in there. Honduras has to come into the picture there. But Honduras cannot influence or cannot determine what will be the decision of the court. The decision of the court, Marlene, first of all, well, let me clear up something else first. We heard the Prime Minister say in Parliament that before this thing goes to court, if it is approved by the referendum, the Maritime Areas Act will be amended.
Can I just interject there? I
Yes.
don't know how much that gives security to voters, because we've heard other declarations before by the Prime Minister that have not been followed through, including taking the special agreement to the House of Representatives.
Okay. Fair.
So can we use another point? How else
Well,
do you
all right.
justify this?
Let us, all right. I am saying, and I've said it before, and you know, I've been campaigning for years that we should amend the Maritime Areas Act, a mantra that I've been repeating for many, many years. And we have the assurance now made in Parliament by the Prime Minister that it will be amended. And it will be amended to remove that temporary limitation that was put there strictly in order to facilitate negotiations that were ongoing at the time. Negotiations stopped when we signed the special agreement. So from then, it should have been amended. But anyhow, it will be amended before we go to court. The point
We're
is...
being told.
We're being told. The point is that when the court looks at the maritime areas, it will apply the International Conference on the Law of the Sea rules. Now, the application of those rules are difficult to predict in a finite way. It's hard for anybody to say that is exactly the line that the court will draw. Difficult, because the court will take all kinds of things into consideration, but it will follow certain principles. First thing it will do, there are, I think, 3 steps that it follows. The first step is to draw the median line. The second step is to try and see, well, what happens if you draw the median line and you have those, the territorial limits of Honduras, of Belize, lock in Guatemala, right? Then they'll say, well, we have to find a way for Guatemala to egress to the high seas. So they'll have to move that line. When they move that line, then they have a third step, which is it fair and equitable given the configuration of the coast? If a country has a longer coastline, it should have greater access, right? We have a longer coastline in Guatemala, so it will have to take into account whether it will adjust that line that it moved in favor of Belize. Those are the rules that they have established that they will follow. They won't change the rules. But the application of the rules is unknown, man. I can't predict exactly where the line will be, but I can tell you that those are the rules they will follow. I can't go better than that.
And in that lack of certainty, would you then
So is
say
there a risk
that
there?
when we speak about risks, this is one of the area that we have neglected to speak about in where we may lose, perhaps not territory, but territorial seas?
Lose. Again, you see, if there had never been a claim, we'd still have to go through this process, and it would be exactly the same. That's why I said when the court
But it
gets
would
to
be
that,
distinctly different if there wasn't a claim, because we wouldn't have to go to the International Court of Justice to decide that.
we might have to, yes. If we couldn't, every country has to try to negotiate its sea boundaries with its neighbors. If it cannot, and it really wants to have that border defined, it has to go to the ICJ or to the International Tribunal on Law of the Sea. We'd have to go anyhow, because we know that it would be difficult, even if there wasn't a claim, it would be difficult for us maybe to agree with Guatemala and Honduras exactly where the lines are. So we'd have to go to these judicial instances anyhow. So that's why I say it's not so much a risk, it's a risk of everyday life. I mean, you can't predict where that line will be, but you can predict what law will be applied to decide what that thing will be, and what steps will be taken, the 3-step process that I just described, by the ICJ or by the Tribunal on Law of the Sea.
Can I ask my final question? And
Please
I want to end where I started. Okay. Because, for better or worse, this is the last time that we will see you. Well, at least I will see you until after the other end of this ballot thing. The latest thing to have happened is that Belizeans have gone down to the Sarstoon and they worked with a flag. They took away our flag. Now, the response by the foreign minister has been simply, tell her not to go there.
Sorry?
Tell her not to go there.
Oh.
If you're not to go there, don't go there. Going down to the referendum vote, persons are watching, they're looking. Most people have already come to a position based on whatever it is. They have a deep-seated position. Some of them have identified where they're going. Some of them really are going to wait until they get into the ballot box. And to my mind, when you get in there, you will fall back on what your gut feeling is. That gut feeling is moved by emotion. Taking away a flag, feeling insulted by the response of the foreign minister. Some people might look at this television and not necessarily find any comfort in you as one of the advertisers for the yes. I want to go back to the issue of trust. How do we strip away all of that? Not feeling insulted, not because I don't like Assad Shoman's position. I feel disappointed that I viewed him as a socialist and now he's now aligned with a capitalist ideal.
Which is, sorry, the ideal is what?
Well,
What's the capitalist ideal?
Not an ideal.
To preserve our territorial integrity?
A capitalist funding.
And the ideal is to preserve our territorial integrity.
The ideal is different. Funding. Funding. There's funding. You're right. Okay. It was capitalist funding.
Capitalist funding. Okay.
Yes. So,
is there another
how do we people funding? You're good. You're good. So, how do we strip away all of these distractions? Because at the end of the day, whatever it is, we do need a true vote.
The way you strip it away, I think, is that you ask people to decide not on the basis of a political party, which a lot of them will do, unfortunately. Not on the basis of being in favor of the government or against it. Not on the basis of trusting Sidi or not trusting Sidi. In fact, if you don't trust Sidi, you will vote yes. Because he is in charge of this process right now. If you vote yes, you take it out of his hands, man. He can't control it anymore. You know what happens if we vote no? Sidi Elrington will continue to control the process. Because it's not going to be the court. Voting yes takes it away from the government, from the foreign minister, from everybody, puts it in the hands of 15 judges. You want to trust those 15 judges or not? That's your decision, but that's what it does.
Gotcha.
Yes, but the critical step missed there is the government does appoint who will be or decide who will be the agent, who will be the lawyers, who will be the ad hoc judge on behalf of Belize.
Well,
so it's not completely
there need not be an
out
ad hoc judge, and if there is, it probably won't make a difference, because if there's an ad hoc judge for Belize,
there'll be
there's
an ad hoc judge for Guatemala.
So they cancel out one another.
But
so
it still depends on who has greater weight in that ruling room.
Come on, it doesn't. I mean, one ad hoc judge won't be able to change the minds of a significant number of judges, please. That's fantasy. And as to who will be the lawyers, we know that already. It's been advertised.
We know the law firm.
Law firm that was taken on by the PUP administration in 2007 on the advice of L.A. Lauterbach from then. In fact, I was part of who negotiated with the representatives of that firm, please, man. And that firm has been maintained by the government since then. And it is the firm that we know and that we've asked people to check and to look at. So, you know, a lot of things can be brought up, Marlena. You know that.
Of course.
To
and
create
these are all
distrust,
the
to create
questions.
confusion.
No, these are.
What?
I understand
Let
why,
people-
as a yes proponent, you may feel that way. But I think that what we have to be honest about, for the sake of our viewers especially, is that there's still a lot of questions, and a lot of it leads back to the very same issue we said, mistrust. So as cynical as they may seem, as someone who's so certain in their decision, there's still questions that deserve to be answered.
Fine.
Now,
Fine.
But
I'm not questioning.
let me allow you to close off. We have maybe 2 minutes.
Okay.
Just to talk about what you hope the Belizean people will have in their mind when they go into that polling station come May 8th. This is the most important decision we've ever asked our voters to make, and probably will ever ask our voters to make. What do you hope they will have in their mind when they make that decision?
Only one thing only. If we submit this matter to the ICJ, are we going to lose any territory or not? Are we going to win or are we going to lose? Only that. On the balance of all the evidence and of all that they know. Answer that question. Only that question. Not whether you trust the government, not whether you like this party or that party, or trust this person or that person. That question, from what I have learned, are we going to lose? And vote in accordance with your answer to that question.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and having this conversation with us. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.